Most of the people travel in trains, but this is compatible with delays, uncomfortable places, and uncomfortable environment. But there are some trains that are exempt from all these queries. That's because they're abandoned. However, you can't have everything. From just like jet horsepower powerful train to a neglected locomotive graveyard, let's have a look at the 15 most unimaginable abandoned trains that exist in the world.
Before we move further, make sure you hit that like button, and also subscribe to our channel.
Number 15, Abandoned Soviet Jet. In the 1970s were a moderately crazy time for technological discovery, with many architects taking influence from the drug-fueled 60s science fiction movies. For example, this Soviet jet train. At that time the Soviets originated a turbojet train. You're assuming that it was some kind of large-tech bullet train, but you'd be very unsuitable, frustrated by what I can only perceive was a lot of delays in subway travel. A New York railroad designer called the Don Weitzel was given a hard task making the train traveling easier, cheaper and faster. You know what, surprisingly, he came up with an innovative idea, strapping 2 jet engines to the rooftop of the train and just kind of see what happens. It is the kind of brilliant intelligent thinking that no doubt ends in tragedy, but it worked here. The trains were able to approach speeds of up to 165 miles per hour, making the entire endeavor a complete success. So flourishing in fact that the Russians tried to copy it. But, the Soviets were able to build their successful turbo trains, but they didn't pick up speed. Now they're just rusting in a modern-day rush. With no passengers, no approvals, actually they're presumably pretty happy about that last segment. Number 14, PERM region. There's a lot of cemeteries around the world for just about everything, from people to monsters to trains buried in Russia's PERM region. This graveyard contains the abandoned and decaying bodies of trains from 1936 and 1956. It appears more sinister than it is. It's just a bunch of unemployed trains, but cemetery sounds so much more impressive, right, with trains left sitting on a bunch of neglected rails, and enclosed by the overgrown natural herbs. This area was once a backup real base for the Soviets if nuclear battle were to break out, and it was pretty ordinary, with over 140 trains being gripped there, but of course, the Cold War came to an end ultimately. And when that happened, all of those old steam trains were just left to disappear. The PERM Region Cemetery is a tribute to development, a reminder that time influences progressing, and nothing stays the alike. That said, it's still a shame as these trains are ingenious construction achievements. Number 13. Georgia Train Bridge. Not only all evacuated trains are just left by the roadside to rust until departure. Some people come up with inventive ways to use the old long-abandoned train cadavers for good. Take for occurrence, this remarkably useful train bridge. This appropriate platform can be found in the nation of China, Georgia, and it's an exceptional idea. The river beneath the train is disreputable in the area, for its straight, forceful currents having caused infrequent tragic accidental deaths. So rather than allow these death numbers to recapitulate mounting, the geniuses in Georgia came up with a more dependable solution, by hollowing out one of their abandoned trains. It can be used as both a supported way to cross from one side to the additional, as well as possibly converting, a tourist hotspot. Genius pretending. Maybe I would like to consult more of this type of imaginative thinking. It's a humiliation to observe so many flawlessly good trains left to abandoned on the side of the trail. Number 12, Abandoned EUROSTAR train. This EUROSTAR connecting London to Paris is one of the most prestigious trains in all of Europe. However, the most popular trains are not entirely protected to the tragic events of aging. One vlogger appeared to stumble upon a long-discarded EUROSTAR train left behind in Paris, and it's kind of spooky. Honestly talking, the train is about as perfect as it was when it was abandoned. Although of course, it is precisely more gross to look at. The skylights have been smashed in the seats and exteriors are pretty dirty. And the vlogger own reports, the interiors smells of dust. So it's reasonable to say that this is not a well-protected train. This EUROSTAR carriage seems to have once consisted of 13 coaches, and 2 restaurant cars, all of which are still the same. The train is considered to be one of the old EUROSTAR trains, in service mid-1994 and 2014, when it was reconstructed by a newer model, the Classic one. What's most unbelievable about this one is that the EUROSTAR is not an usual train. This is an expensive vehicle, and left us into the rust, so unceremoniously as offensive. Number 11, ALDWYCH Station. If you believe this, you people's seen all the station before this long, abandoned London tunnel station as a famous of television and film productions. This is ALDWYCH undercover station, that require a World War era or dystopian train station such as Satisfaction, and V for Vendetta. But if you look similarly, you force be able to see some World War in its lifetime. ALDWYCH station has had a relatively steady period of exercise after inaugurating in 1907. It endured in service until 1917, due to the war-era reopening, and prevailing in service until 1994. Since 1994, the station has stood untouched, and almost completely reserved for television and film production or private tours. However, the trains are completely operational, believe it or not. A 1972 Northern Line tube train is lastingly kept on the tracks for use in said productions and is competent of actual travel to a real tube station, although it expects standard operation, and is frequently not used. United Kingdom peoples don't pay much consideration to the world around them, so they'd just get on, and end up somewhere casual. Although each station is one of the few transport stations that is almost flawlessly preserved from its bloom. Number 10. Abandoned in Scotland. It's marvelous how many people randomly discover and abandon trains in the center of nowhere. This train was discovered while someone was on an urban investigation of old dispensary grounds in Scotland. That's some Blair Witch fantasies, right there. The train was discovered with 12 coaches, sitting empty on an old line of railway tracks. While some of the coaches were smoked and destroyed. But everything other was in a good situation. If you can look beyond the smashed glass and wide untidiness, those that were positive enough to enter the train toilet were just as disturbed to find that it was the completest toilet I have ever seen on a train. That's pretty majestic, truly. Every train toilet I've visited has been easily one of the most repulsive. Nobody understands much about what this train was, neither where it came from. But the natural condition of some operations makes it one of the more extraordinary finds to come out of Scotland. Number 9, Eagle Lake Train. Supposedly going to find a 100-year-old locomotive. Screened away in the woods near Maine's Eagle Lake, sits the remains of a once wealthy railroad in 1926. The West Branch Railroad ran over 13 miles, from Eagle Lake to Mombasa Lake, a huge accomplishment for a probably non-major town in the United States. But by the early 1930s, those amazingly well-made trains were discontinued, because these transportations were already estimated to be both old-fashioned and expensive to transport. They were relocated to their current location for accommodation, but it seems that the only storehouse they have experienced is a little of nature's love. Locomotives like this should not be transmitted out in the exposed to rust and rot. The great Indiana Jones belongs in a museum. Still, if nobody is responsible to look after these incredible accomplishments in the way they deserve, at least people can go and tour for themselves. Just beware of fares. Number 8, BEYER-PEACOCK. Vocational. This is not called the Beyer or Peacock train. You don't know why. I'm telling you why. The genuine name of this train is incomprehensible, while we have no intention in the actual genuine name of the train or not. The signed name of the train is the 6042 Garrett 484 plus 484 for the locomotive. I told you that you might not understand. This appropriate train was built way back in 1956, and is the longest train ever to be constructed in the Southern Hemisphere by the then popular BEYER-PEACOCK and Company Limited. The 604 to Garrett 484 plus 484 locomotive or -8. If you choose to complete the train name, one of the most prestigious trains of its time, and was constructed of 2 trains operating back to back, making this double the train that it could have been oppositely. Now that's just genius manufacturing, right? These trains were only established in the Southern Hemisphere, most notably in Australia and Africa, but by the 1970s the trains were rejected entirely, leaving only these rusted husks and backward. Number 7, abandoned New York City subway train. Too honestly, there's presumably a whole bunch of abandoned New York City subway trains out there just expecting to be recognized, and we have no sense. Well, we have a bit of an intention, unless I wouldn't insert it in this video. I applaud your faith in Maine, however disturbed it may be. It's no secret that beneath New York City, there are a whole bunch of hidden and unused subway tunnels and stations, but tangible trains. New York City subway trains have been found all over the state, both underground and above it, some of them even dating back to the 1980s. But the multiple fascinating things about these trains are just the impossibility of moving them. How did they occupy them away from a functioning track? We can't answer the first, but we know the explanation to the second one. No people, no problems. Most New Yorkers would rather not go watching for discarded subway trains, primarily not if they're in poor condition. Number 6. Bolivia's train cemetery. Practiced cemeteries, you wait for one and then sparse crops up around a region at once. There is a remarkable amount of qualified cemeteries all around the world. But Bolivia's self-named Great Train Graveyard is one of the best, or at least the most outstanding. I'll be straightforward, I'm not sure what the guidelines for an excellent train burial site is. This train graveyard relaxes on the outskirts of a desert-exchanging village called Uyuni, and that is all the control you demand. This is not a little plot of land for rare trains, but a large dedicated section for these old abandoned trains to live out their final decades, as they would have liked, pounded with sand and coated with rust once a decade. The cemetery is so big, and can easily be convinced, that all of the abandoned trains of South America have been relocated here for their decisive rites, and that may well be the trouble. After all, we don't know where they came from. Let the conspiracy speculations arise. The cemetery graveyard is an excellent way to say goodbye to all of these brilliant service locomotives who gave their lives to serve our every traveling hymn. Number 5. Trans-Europe Express. This unusual-looking train was once known as the Trans-Europe Express, or the T, before 1957 and 1995. This train connected 130 cities all across Europe. An almost unheard-of feat for a single train company. But every rise comes with a sharp fall, and the Express quickly became an Express. Yeah, let's move on from that one right in 1974. At what may well be the peak of the whole endeavor, the Trans-Europe Express was operating with 45 trains, connecting 130 different European cities, from Spain to Austria, Denmark to southern Italy. Despite the wildly different electrics used in different countries, the T was built to adapt from place to place, meaning that it could operate at least 2 different voltages at once. Unfortunately, the 1970s couldn't last forever, no matter how much the Starland vocal band wanted it to. As air travel became more affordable and convenient, the businessmen that largely made up the T's clientele jumped ship, or train, and the whole prospect became too expensive. While there are some trains on display in museums around the world, there are just as many abandoned all over Europe, for a groundbreaking and long-serving terrain. It's quite an unceremonious way to end things. Number 4. Abandoned MAINE steam engines. So you imagined Maine was all lobsters, and Stephen King's nightmare is better to invent again. There's also a couple of discontinued trains, lurking in the woods that examined, more sinister than I indicated, but there are 2 abandoned trains into the woods. Just sounds so boring. Hidden in the woods are the rusting remnants of 2 steam-powered locomotives, the last remnants of Maine's Industrial Revolution. These massive hunks of metal were at one time the most attractive way to travel around the state. Now they're just 2 big old pieces of scrap metal that pose a serious threat to children, and are just another bit of proof that given the rock stars of rail ultimately fall apart. The reason as to why these trains have been left in the woods is sadly not as exciting as you'd hope. To operate in a very exclusive area of the country, and it apparently was not examined practical or financially responsible to bring them out of the woods. What a way to die. These trains have remained in the exact same location for decades and continue to be a unique tourist hotspot for curious train fans and or weird things in the forest enthusiasts. Number 3. Tram Graveyard. Eastern Europe and Russia are 2 trains that Florida is to the venerable. It's the place you go to live out your terminal years relaxing in the sun before you ultimately find your peace. If you think that's a pretty grim way to start this entry, you'd be right, but then we're resembling at yet another graveyard, so what do you expect from me, a limerick? This remarkable cemetery can be found in Russia, and restrains hundreds of abandoned cars, buses, trains, and trams. But while other train cemeteries tend to be popular tourist attractions, almost nobody knows about this one. Admittedly, that may be because nobody really wants to know. It seems that most people in Russia consider it to be nothing more than a dumping ground for vehicles, a place for old trains, trams, buses, and cars to quietly rot away far from their natural lives, while vehicle graveyards are common throughout Eastern Europe and Russia. A few of them look as discouraging as there are so many vehicles kept in this particular cemetery that it almost seems a waste to just let them die. At least make an Oscar-nominated tragic drama about it. Thomas the Slightly Pasted Tank Transformer. Number 2. Trolley, Central Pennsylvania. Don't get too complacent. We're headed back to the graveyard on this century. And this time it's for the most fun trains ever planned for use on Earth. This one really does verbalize like a bummer. But really, there's some hope here. Trolley Central, also known as the Vintage Electronic Streetcar Company, is primarily one big plot of land for dead trolleys to be dumped. However, there is a catch: the 40-plus trolleys left here are not surely abandoned or dumped. You'll be pleased to know those kept at this graveyard are actually tending to be restored or recycled as parts for the future rehabilitation of other trolleys. So while these trolleys are unhappily rotting, I guess this is less a graveyard and more a place for reincarnation. I'll take all the hope I can get in these troubling times. The excellent news here is that these trains are only at this site transitorily, and many of them will actually be restored and used somewhere else. But the bad news is that, well, these incredible vehicles are just being left to rot for the time being. And no matter how you look at that, it sucks. Trolleys are impressive. Number 1, JACUMBA, California. For those that are captivated with abandoned trains, JACUMBA, California is like Disneyland. While it may not have Mickey or Minnie or any of the roller coasters of Disneyland, it does have a long-spun, unused track, and a collection of abandoned trains. So close sufficient, right? Many use the empty railroad tracks of JACUMBA as a hiking trail, venturing down to the unexplained path in search of something incredible, and there is quite a lot of incredible stuff, with the very first abandoned train appearing around a mile. In following that, it's a steady trail of abandoned trains, tunnels, Wild West-era bridges, and some truly breathtaking, with everything from a 1980s-era train to a Mexican locomotive. This 7+ mile hike really is a never-ending source of mysteriously abandoned transportations. There aren't many people that have accomplished to walk the entire trail. But those that have done a tangible amount have been pretty amazed by just how well preserved the interiors of the trains are, despite occurring several decades faded. Which of these trains would you most like to check out? Let us know in the comments. Also check out our other cool stuff showing up on the screen right now. See you next time.